Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 18th episode of the Manor Podcast. I'm your co-host, Bodee, joined as always with my best friend and other co-host, Michael Hamilton. Michael, why are we recording so early in the morning?
Well, there's a funny story. We actually recorded about half the episode yesterday, and there was a lawnmower going on in your background going, and I'm making lawnmower sounds, cutting all that grass. And of about the 25 to 30 minutes somewhere in there that we had recorded, maybe a little less than that. I don't remember exactly how far we were, but of that time, basically all of it except the first 3 or 4 or 5 minutes was lawnmower in. So
I like your lawnmower impression. It's spot on.
Thank you. So that's why we are up at bright and early, 8 a.m. on our day off from testing. So we normally wouldn't have to be up this morning to get this podcast recorded because I have a very busy week ahead of me, or that's why we're recording early. Yeah.
That's fair. I hate mornings. Mornings are the worst.
Is it just because you feel sluggish?
I feel sluggish. It takes forever for me to get to sleep. And then once I'm asleep, I never want to wake up because I work so hard to get to sleep. So I want to sleep for 18 hours straight, ideally, and then be up for 30 hours and you sleep for 18 hours. That's my ideal sleep schedule, but that's not how society functions.
Huh. 18 hours of sleep, 30 hours awake. That would be interesting.
Yeah, it's just, I don't like waking up because you were sleeping and it was so nice and you were dreaming and then you don't have any stimulants in your system. So I don't have any of my Adderall because I have ADHD. I don't have any caffeine because coffee is delicious. So I have to get that in my system, but it's hard to get that stuff before you have it in your system. It's just a whole thing in the morning,
That's very different from my mornings because I don't take any stimulants, but it does make sense.
You should try it. It helps you stay awake once you're awake, and then you never want to sleep for 30 hours. It's perfect.
Sure, that doesn't sound perfect, but it makes sense that that's how it works.
So, believe it or not, today's episode is not all about stimulants. It is about what we're going to be playing at Nationals. Michael has broken the format with the most broken deck of all time, and he's going to tell you all about it right now.
I wouldn't say that I have broken the format or I have the most broken deck of all time. I think I am playing a reasonably normal-ish deck on a weird axis, and I think that it will catch some people by surprise, and also I think it's pretty powerful in testing even against teammates that kind of knew what I was doing. It seemed like it was going pretty well. So I'm basically playing Isylander, but
Wounding Bull Isylander.
I cut a lot of the red spells that, in my opinion, are not a great rate, like red Ice Bolt, red Aether Hail, even red Freezing Point I've trimmed. And instead of playing these cards, I've replaced them with, like Roger said, red Wounded Bull. I think it's Wounded Bull. It's a 3-for-7 or 3 cost 7 power attack that says if you're lower than your opponent when you play this, it gets +1 attack. So as Isylander, you're almost always lower than your opponent. So this card very frequently is a 2-card 8 hand that your opponent's not going to be playing D-Rex against you. They're going to have less blocking armor. You're just probably going to get more damage from playing this, even if they want to block it, than you would from casting a Ice Bolt or a Freezing Point early to mid points in the game. Then I'm playing the better version of Wounded Bull. I'm also playing Red Fyendal's Fighting Spirit for similar reasons. It's a 2-card 8 swing, and this one's better because it blocks for 2, but it gains life when you block, whereas Wounded Bull doesn't do anything when you block with it. And then I'm playing Scar for a Scar because that's just the best of this effect. And these efficient attacks are there because Isylander's damage is really inefficient on her own turn normally through casting her spells, like I was saying. And this kind of fixes that problem so she can threaten reasonably more damage in a turn cycle by playing these attack actions instead of playing spells. It makes some of the fuse cards worse, and it makes blocking equipment actually get value against you, which is unfortunate. But if your opponent isn't playing any Arcane Barrier, you're still pretty happy, even if they get to block some of your attacks. And yeah, so that's my deck.
I can't wait to see it win Nationals as you attack your opponent with Wounded Bull for the win.
No, the attacks are never what actually is the lethal hit. The attacks get blocked and then you kill them with spells on their turn.
I believe you call them tenderizers.
Yeah, they're the tenderizers. Instead of playing the big meaty spells, we're just playing big meaty attacks. to tenderize them.
Yeah. I will say it's an interesting deck. There's a non-0% chance I play this deck at Nationals. I think what's making me a little apprehensive is that it has a very high skill cap on it. And obviously in the hands of the world-class players like Michael Hamilton, it's going to really shine. But in the hands of mopey old Roger Bodee, I feel like there's a lot of pitfalls and missequenced turn cycles that I could fall into to make the deck really falter.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of stuff that you would pick up on from playing it for a few weeks, and you'd probably, I feel like pretty confident that you could play it well if you had more than a little less than a
5
week
days.
to prepare for the event. It is probably a little late to pick it up, but I guess you said you might play it. So what are you're not locked on a deck yet?
No, I was trying to build a Oldheim deck that was a little bit bigger to try to get more equity or flexibility in the mirror by playing Anathos instead of Sledge. So if a lot of the time in Oldheim mirrors, everybody blows up Tunic, you always need 2 cards in order to swing your hammer. But Anathos is nice because you can just always swing it for 4, worst case scenario, just 3 for 4, instead of needing the 4 resources total for 6.
Yeah.
And in order to accommodate that, then instead of playing Findall's Spring Tunic, I was playing Heart of Ice, so that way I could always pitch 2 cards with an activated ability of Heart of Ice on my turn to make my opponent's defense reactions worse, and then pitch the other card to swing 6 if I still want to, or swing 4 if my hin is more efficient that way.
Yeah, having the option to 1 card 4 instead of 2 card 6, one of those is a much better rate than the other. So the times that you would want to swing 1 card 4, it's really nice to be on Anathos instead of Sledge. So
right. What makes it awkward is that sometimes you want to 1 card 4, but keep the other card in your hand in order to try to set up an arsenal. But that means at that point, then your opponent's just going to ice react you in the mirror more often than not. And then you don't get the arsenal anyways. And then you've just swung less damage overall. It is kind of nice because instead of blocking 2 cards for 6, your opponent only blocks 1 card for 3 and then usually leaks a point of damage at that point then. But then you're also spewing more cards in your deck than they're spewing. And I guess spewing, I mean like discarding, because you're blocking 2 cards for their hammer attack and they're using 1 card out of deck and then 1 react that goes back into deck for 1 point of damage. And then that usually puts you behind in the late game then at that point, as far as like cards of deck. So you have to worry more about fatigue.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense about the fatigue stuff. Especially if they're on Tunic and occasionally getting the 1 card 6, then they're like at a fine place tempo-wise and in a good spot for the fatigue race. So
yeah, there were just a lot of things that looked nice about it in theory and in the first like 5 to 10 games of testing that I was really enjoying the deck. But then games 10 through 40, I think I've played so far in Flesh and Blood Online, there's just been a lot more clunkiness and awkwardness that I picked up on. And you still have some really, really rough matchups in Dromai and Dash. For Dromai, I was trying to play cards like Zealous Belting or even Scar for a Scar alongside of E-Strike in order to have more go again. But I still don't think that beats their endgame setup sometimes, where they can still just play like a Miragi and a Chromai or something like that in the same turn, or you're still not very efficiently dealing with Passing Mirage.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one that gives no Phantasm, right?
Yes.
Because you have go again, but you don't necessarily have ways to generate action points because it's still a Spectre Aura. Yay, Spectre Auras, yay. So it was still
Sorry.
a very long, grindy matchup.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Testing from the Oldheim side, I was definitely also struggling into Dromai, and that's part of why I moved off Oldheim to a deck that, in my opinion, actually has a good Dromai matchup now that it's on these attack actions. But I guess we'll see how it goes to the tournament, but I've been pretty happy with how Dromai's looked for me.
Yeah, you just go pop now, and they're not expecting poppers out of Isylander.
So you're not playing this Anathos Oldheim anymore. You're thinking about playing the Isylander deck that I'm playing. What other decks are you looking at potentially?
Maybe Viserai, if I could try to figure out a way to make the Oldheim matchup not atrocious. I
Mhm.
don't think there's a good way to necessarily fix the Icelander matchup. So if I see you in the finals, I'll just scoop and we'll move on with our lives, I suppose. But
Be a nice
I
spot
think,
to meet.
yeah. And so against Oldham, I'm trying to think of ways to play like a more defensive strategy, similar to how they were playing with Scaletta, but trying to set up like these 12 to 20 rune chants in order to just like set up a really big Mordred tie turn, go off that way. And then you play like more defense reactions like Sink Below, and then Reduce to Rune Chant also is a really strong card that allows you to set up a rune chance as well as block efficiently from Arsenal. I just haven't tested it, and I've heard decent things from Zach on our testing team, who's been playing a lot of Viserai lately. So I'm probably going to start with some version of his list and try to see if I can make it work. And then I just feel like, once again, kind of like how we talked last week, Viserai is just a deck that I feel like just has like 40 to 50% matchup win rates across the board and has the least amount of matchups that are just like, oh man, I just can't ever win right now. I think it's really only Icelander that I can think of. And yeah.
If you can get the Oldham matchup to a good spot.
Yeah. And there's a world even where like maybe that semi OTK plan's viable against Icelander. Because I guess I'll ask from your perspective, what makes the Viserai matchup so good for Icelander?
I think the reason it's so good for Icelander is because you get to maximize Alluvian Constellus when Viserai is attacking you almost every turn. His rune chants are popping and just giving you a bunch of free resources over the course of the game. So I think it is possible that like an OTK plan would work pretty well against Icelander. I'm not really sure. I haven't tested into a more OTK-ish plan. I haven't gotten as much testing in as I would like to, and unfortunately, I'm going to be busy all of next week. So it's kind of wait for testing.
Have been quite busy in real life, taking away from our flesh and blood testing time. It's really unfortunate that we have lives outside of the game.
Yeah, even you would think waking up to play Flesh and Blood for an hour and a half every morning of the week would be enough to make you feel prepared for an event. But really, just like it takes a lot of games to really have a strong grasp on all of your matchups, especially when you're like going back and forth between what decks you're going to play, what heroes, and there's just a lot to learn in this game and not infinite time to learn it all. So you do the best you can with the time you have.
Yeah. And then there's weird niche picks like Rhinar or Dorinthia, the tier D heroes that I just try to pick up wins with because people aren't good against them. And Rhinar did just win Malaysia Nats, so maybe Rhinar is busted.
Yeah. I really did like that Rhinar list. So I think for a second I thought Dorinthia won a Nationals too, but it was a Blitz National, so it doesn't count.
Yeah.
Not very helpful for determining decks that are good in Classic Constructed.
Right. And I think there's even less of a world where Dorinthia consistently beats Oldham than necessarily. Although I played against an Axis Dorinthia, and I think if the Axis Dorinthia fat decked against my Oldham deck, they actually won that game. It was just really annoying just dealing with like 2 axe swings every turn consistently, just a 2 and a 3 and a 2 and a 3.
Yeah.
And they still block really efficiently.
Did you play Rampart or did you play Stalagmite?
I played, I didn't know they were on axes right before the match, so I played Stalagmite thinking that I'd get more equity against it, against like Dawnblade and stuff like that with Winter's Wail. And I think if you face up, they're on Accessory, Rampart's the better choice, but obviously I didn't know and played Stalagmite.
Yeah. That's another matchup that I haven't gotten a lot of reps into, so I'm not even sure when, I guess I don't know how to beat Dorinthia with Oldham. Everyone says that Dorinthia is this hero that you need to have a bunch of reps against to know how to play against, and I feel like I do not have those reps. So it's
I played against it in the Battle Harden round 1, and I almost lost that game. And I've lost against it one other time on Talishar, and then I beat it the other. So I played 5 times against Dorinthia, and I think I'm 3-2 overall against it. 4-1. I lost 1 time against it online, and then I beat it on the Battle Hardened the other 3 times I played against it. The one time I lost, they just fat decked and then just were able to set up really efficient second cycle and ending on like a Remembrance to put in all of their good non-attack actions again. And I just couldn't keep enough cards in my hand to both swing back relevant attacks and block out this consistent damage from Dawnblade every turn, because Dorinthia does ask you to block with almost every card in your hand when she's doing her thing.
Mhm.
And so you have to decide if it's worth it to like let her get her counter or let her push all this damage in order to try to swing back. And that's always a risky proposition on Oldhim, because you're just swinging back this one big attack. And if they have the defense reaction, like a Steelblade Shunt red or Unmovable red in their arsenal while they're on as their last card in hand, or they'll just sitting in arsenal, it's kind of a risky proposition to just come back with one big attack, on top of which Warrior just naturally has just a lot of good blocking armor.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think overall, I'd say Guardian's biggest weakness is decks that can easily cover up their big, powerful attacks. Like when you get your Oaken old Unmovable, it feels like the game's just over sometimes.
Yeah, because you have to usually like take some kind of tempo loss in order to set it up, because what you're doing is you're saying, well, I'm going to take whatever damage you're presenting this turn in order to keep my 3 to 4 cards that I need for this Oakenhold. And then hopefully then after that, this Oakenhold hits, you no longer have any ways to meaningfully pressure me again. And then I can push another big Dom attack that's hopefully disruptive against you, which you will once again need to either full lock out and spend a lot of resources doing, or else then if the on hit doesn't matter, or if they're able to play through it, then you can once again get back on the back foot. And it's kind of tricky for Oldhim to recover from that point sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I guess that's kind of like why Fatigue Oldhim is potentially a thing you could do if people are boarding in a bunch of defense reactions when they see Oldhim. Maybe it's time to really like try to fatigue people again with Oldhim. I've never thought it was like the best strategy, but when everyone's Oldhim is this aggro deck that you want defense reactions against, you want to block out. And if that's the case, then maybe the fatigue builds look fine again. I don't know.
Until you look at the 55 minutes on the clock and realize that you've used 55 or 54 minutes and 30 seconds and your opponent's still at 10 and you're at 20 and there's still 10 cards in deck for everybody. And you have to have that awkward like, oh, I think I can win this game, but you can't ask your opponent to concede because there's a judge sitting right there and you can't explain anything more. And they're like, no, I think I can still win, or they'll just take the draw and then you lose anyways. And it's like,
Yeah, I guess that's a pretty solid argument for not playing hard fatigue in tournaments. But
yeah, just because the clock is just such a real thing and it's really difficult in this game. So like in Magic, I feel like turn cycles were a lot faster. And so playing a control deck, I never had an issue with the clock, like playing hard control decks. Like I would play the slowest, dirtiest, do nothing decks in Magic, but my pace of play is always extremely fast. I'm always at least able to find competent lines. I'm not always saying I find the best lines, that maybe I would find better lines if I took like an extra, 30 seconds to think about it. But at least in Magic the Gathering too, your turn cycle was a lot of the time, if playing control deck was just land go. So the game always exclusively played on your opponent's turn. Whereas that just never happens in Flesh and Blood, because if you're not at least like swinging a hammer, or eventually you'll be presenting some kind of attack to your opponent and they'll spend like 2 or 3 minutes sometimes like, do I block? Do I not block? What happens if I get crushed? What if they have the attack reaction? There's just a lot of things to consider, and that just burns clock time when you're playing these decks.
yeah, and one other big difference between Flesh and Blood and Magic that I think is a big part of why Flesh and Blood takes a lot longer is in Magic, your hand like stays between turn cycles. You draw one new card every turn, and for the most part, you know your hand before your turn starts. Or you know your hand from like the beginning of the game, and it's never going to have a big shift in what it is unless you cast some big spell that draws you a bunch of cards.
Like Sphinx's Revelation, hell yeah.
But for the most part, you have your hand, and it just changes by one card every turn. So you're not adding that much new information each turn cycle. So you can you have this consistent plan that doesn't change that much from turn to turn. And sometimes you draw like, maybe your hand is missing a 2-drop and you draw a 2-drop on turn 2, but that doesn't change anything. You're just now going to play your 2-drop instead of not. So whereas in Flesh and Blood, at the end of each of your turns, you draw 4 new cards, and then your opponent's attacking you, and you're like, well, how do I maximize these cards both defensively and offensively, and how does that fit into my current game plan of fatigue or aggro or whatever it is you're trying to do?
And then do I want to give up some block on a piece of equipment this turn? Do I think, or can I save it for later? Do I know if one of these pieces are coming up in the next few cards on my second cycle? There's just so much to consider on any one hand of Flesh and Blood. It's just naturally very time consuming.
Yeah. And then on top of that, maybe your opponent leads with a Scarf or a Scar, and you're like, okay, I know what I want to do if they end without an on hit, but what do I do if they block or they end their chain with a Snatch? Does that change things? And you have to figure all that out from the first attack to figure out how you want to block. And it just does take a lot longer to play a turn cycle in Flesh and Blood. And that's just the nature of the game, I think.
Right. So all that to say, that is making me shy away from Oldhim too. Plus, the other thing is, even if I just play a more traditional version of Oldhim, the mirror is just miserable. I just hate the mirror Oldhim. It's just so, I don't know, boring. Once you play it, like the first 10 times you play, you're like, oh, cool, I get it. Like there's these cool interactions and you got to play around pummel in these spots. You got to manage your life total, and these cards matter and these cards don't matter, and blah, 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 blah. And then you start to realize like, well, really it just comes down to like who gets expose the elements off. And like, if we both expose, then the game becomes truly miserable.
Yeah.
And it just is not a very fun experience.
Yeah, I really like Oldhim mirrors outside of expose the elements. Like when no one's playing that card, I think the mirrors are, in my opinion, pretty enjoyable. There's a lot of like small things you can do to get an advantage, and there's like a lot of things that you can slightly mess up and will kind of make the game hard to win if you make some mistakes. And I think all that falls apart when they expose your Tunic and you can no longer ever one card sledge, and suddenly it's just every turn is 2 card sledging, because if you don't swing your weapon, you'll fall so far behind in the fatigue race.
Yeah.
So I guess expose is a big part of why I am not registering Oldhim for this event. And I also think that Oldhims are going to be pretty ready for the mirror. And I was finding if I was devoting too many sideboard slots to the mirror, playing one copy of Expose, maybe 6 or 7 D-Reacts, that it was really hard to keep maintaining good matchups against the aggro decks and having a reasonable matchup against Drobai and Isylander. Just, it's a lot to cover. And I don't think you can actually cover it all from the Oldhim side.
Yeah, because against Dash and Dromai and Isylander, you're the beatdown. They actually have the better long game and second cycle and inevitability in the matchup, which is weird because Oldhim is designed to be this really long, grindy hero, but ultimately there are just other heroes that just have better endgame states that are better than just like fused Oaken Olds and just swinging Sledge or Winter's Wail every turn. Like those are good game states to get in, but obviously the game states of setting up all these Amulets of Ice and Frost Hexes and Insidious Chills, stripping your entire hand and dealing 30 damage to you is a better endgame than a fused Oaken Old, or
a little bit stronger.
Yeah, or attacking you with like 50 power of dragons in one turn is probably a little bit better than swinging Sledge for the turn. So
yeah, and it's interesting where Oldhim has these tools to be very good against the aggro decks, and I think like you can build Oldhim builds that will basically never lose to the aggressive decks. But if you do that, you cannot also reasonably cover these more slow, grindy decks that are happy to play a long game against you, because now that you're built to beat these aggressive decks, you just don't have the tools to win a long game against other slow decks.
Yeah, and then like you said, I also think putting those cards in your deck to beat those matchups makes you reasonably worse in the mirror, because you don't want defense reactions in those matchups. And Oasis Respite is like not an amazing card in any matchup. Weirdly, it's like pretty mopey to cast that card most of the time. Yeah. And you just get in this weird spot where like you said, there's just not enough room in your 80 cards to have a consistent like deck that functions well and can cover all the decks you need to cover.
Yeah. And I would still expect Oldhim to do pretty well at this event. I think that you can get it wrong or not get it wrong. You can like maybe sacrifice one of the matchups and maybe not run into a super skilled pilot of that matchup, or things go a little lucky when you play against them. And that makes it so that you can kind of hedge to be reasonable against 2 of the 3 things, in my opinion. And you can be like okay into all 3 of them. But I think that Oldhim is a solid choice, and you can be in a good spot against a lot of decks, but you can't choose to beat everything. And that's kind of where it just doesn't seem like it'll be the best deck forever, because you can't beat everything basically. So whatever the flavor is, then other decks can pop up to beat it. And there's also like, as you're devoting cards for the mirror too, it makes you worse against everything else. So like even if the Oldheim is the best deck, it'll be kind of like, it gets kind of inbred where the Oldheims are built to beat the other Oldheims, and then the other decks all can rise up and beat it.
Yeah. And ever since Lil, I have like a little bit of PTSD where it also makes deck selection difficult because I just feel like no matter what I pick, I'm just going to hit my bad matchup 7 out of my 10 rounds I'll play over the weekend or whatever. And that's why I'm leaning towards a deck like Viscerai that doesn't necessarily have like those like really polarized matchups necessarily. But I don't know. It's a good thing for the metagame overall that there's so many checks and balances, obviously. Like, I think it speaks to a really well-designed format, but it just makes having confidence in your deck list much harder for the players sometimes at like the highest competitive levels.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you thought about Briar much?
No.
Okay, because I think she's actually the closest here to not having any really bad matchups. I think Viscerai is much worse into Isylander than Briar is, and they're both like pretty similarly bad into Oldheim, depending on the specifics of the Oldheim list. So if you're looking for a deck that doesn't have any bad matchups, I think Briar is a very reasonable choice because I think Oldheim, at least the version of Oldheim that I would recommend and that I played at the Pro Tour, is quite good into Briar. I think a lot of the Oldheims are moving away from that stuff to be better into Isylander, Dromai, and the Mirror, and that gives you room to have a reasonable matchup from the Briar side.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just haven't played a lot of Briar in a long time. I think I could be, and in fact, it's not a hero that I've ever like mained. I've mained Viscerai before, back when Skeletor was around, and so I just don't have a lot of reps on Briar at this point. I don't know. Maybe it's still right. And then speaking of not having reps on a hero, there's the hero that we keep talking about, which is Dromai, and I played maybe 2 games on Dromai across all these weeks.
Yeah, I think Dromai is probably the most difficult hero to play, so I don't think I would recommend switching to Dromai unless you get a lot of reps in over the next week. I think Isylander is hard, but Dromai is like really weird and has very different plans depending on the matchup. You need to learn how to like set up your end game against Oldheim and have reasonable like threat throughout the game, and then against the aggro matchups you need to play like very, very different, and then against Isylander your matchup's also very weird. So I think Dromai is very good, but I think that she's one of the hardest heroes to play right now.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. That's why I'm not really thinking about playing her too much.
So this Nationals event, it's half class constructed, half draft. How have your thoughts and feelings about the draft format changed since Leo?
They haven't. Why would they have?
You just don't like Uprising draft.
Yeah, I think it's this. I have the exact same strategy in this draft than I did in the last few drafts, except now I know what Asvolai does. So I think I've shored up that matchup. Now that I know what Asvolai does, I think that fixes losing to that card. And
it's still a good card, even when they play it correctly.
Yeah, I just plan on never drafting Dromai. And that's why it was weird yesterday when the team meeting, when I was around, I think we spent the majority of the meeting talking about drafting Dromai, and everybody was like, oh, but this dragon's so good, or this card's so good, and I would totally take like blue Ember Moss and a pack one, pick one. And I'm like, no, I wouldn't take that card like in my first 5 picks. I'm terrified of being like the 3rd Dromai in the draft pool, and then you just don't have like a functional deck, and you're just playing like all these mopey cards that just lose to everything.
Yeah. I remember you used to think being the 3rd Isylander was the worst thing in the world, and then you were the 3rd Dromai.
Yeah, and then Michael Hamilton just showed me how to be the 18th Islander in the draft pot and still have winning draft record somehow. So that fixed my opinion on it. I was young and inexperienced in those Road to Nats drafts. You know, it was a different time, different place.
I also was. I was putting some very bad cards in my Isylander decks back then too. So I've learned a lot too.
Yeah, I think the biggest level up for us was just realizing that like all of the 0 cost cards are like pretty good, if not like very good in Isylander, and like Scar for a Scar is just like insane in Isylander, and where that isn't necessarily like readily apparent when you first look at all the cards in the format.
Yeah, and then even the poppers are quite good to attack with. You wouldn't like expect red Flex or red Fyandals to be like bombs, or even red Brother at Arms to be extremely good in Isylander against the non-Dromai decks, but turns out that just hitting Fi with a big attack is quite good because he doesn't block very well and he just takes damage. He doesn't want to block anyway, so he holds his whole hand. He's like, all right, we're going to come back with a big attack, and then you give him a frostbite, it messes up his turn or something.
Yeah, so your plan is to attack with red Findalls and then into blue ice guards on your opponent's turn in limited and classic constructed. That's a very novel approach.
I took my draft Isylander decks. I'm like, what we're good about these? Punching people with red Findalls and red Scar for a Scar. Let's do that in constructed. And that's how we got to my classic constructed deck.
Well, I can't say that it's wrong.
I hope it's not. I do think one downside of my deck is that the Briar matchup is notably worse, I think, with my version, because Embodiments of Earth are very good against trying to attack people for 4 to 8 damage. Whereas,
yeah, but you still have your Arcane and like hand disruption against Briar as well too, right? Or you just don't feel like you can get to like that end game consistently enough now?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't tested it enough, but it did seem like pretty tough in the games that I was playing. So
now I should be playing Briar, so I have a good Michael Hamilton matchup again. That is what I like the most in my decks. When I pick a deck for a tournament, you're on a whole time. I play Prism. I have a good Michael Hamilton matchup. Easy, can't lose.
Yeah, I just think Briar is very good and probably a little bit underexplored by our team. After crushing the Pro Tour, 4 of the top 4 is a pretty good showing. And then we kind of just like, I don't think we spent as much time on her as we potentially could have, because we were kind of, we knew the format would be Oldheim heavy, but a lot of these Oldheim decks are cutting some of the cards that make the Briar matchup so good. And at that point, the Oldheim matchup's probably pretty reasonable. So
yeah, the format's definitely shaking out to be a bit different than we were expecting it to be, even from like when we were talking about like the Nationals decklist reviews like a week ago now. So
yeah, that was only like 4 days to recording, an actual recording time, huh?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, so talked about constructed, talked about limited. You actually booked your flight pretty recently after you queued in the LCQ. Are you excited? Are you nervous?
I'm dreading it.
You're dreading? Oh no, that's not good. It's supposed to be fun.
I feel like like I said, I'm just going to do my 2-1 in draft and just never win a game like a classic constructed. Like I need to see a therapist or something after my results in Lille. I'm just scarred from it. Like it was like so frustrating to put that much like time, effort, and like energy into it, and then seeing the rest of the team do so well, and then I'm just sitting there like, oh well, I guess I'll just not win, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I liked going. I enjoyed hanging out with the Wolfpack very much. I had a grand time overall, but the flesh and blood part, which was supposed to be like super sweet and fun, was not super sweet and fun, and extremely frustrating and disheartening, and made me question myself as a flesh and blood player in not good ways.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess like, do you feel like that's something that like your results from the weekend, do you think that's something that wouldn't happen to other good players, or do you think like that it means that you're not a good player because your results weren't great? Like what?
Yeah, because like for over the year that we've played, you've had a lot of success in like battle hardens and callings and pro tours now, and I haven't been able to do anything. I had like 1 decent results in like top 16 in Cincinnati, and then
you did well at Orlando too.
I mean, yeah, I guess so like the first 2 callings I did reasonable at. Like it was like top 16 or top 32 in like Orlando and Cincinnati. And then since then it's just been like scrub after scrub after scrub after scrub after scrub, and like battle hardens. I guess battle hardens aren't necessarily the best example because it's just lose and you're out. But at callings and the pro tour, they just have not been good results. And then the road to Nats season went like abysmally poor for me. And I had to like barely scrape in at a last chance qualifier. So I don't know. Like, I think I'm above average. Like I could go crush my local armory events, like no problem. Like that's fine. But as far as like competing at like the world stage or national stage, I think it's a very difficult hurdle to get to. And I don't know that I'm like the caliber of player to like actually do it now. Because I think a lot of my strengths are like looking at the meta, evaluating the meta, and like tuning decks. Like I think I'm a really good deck tuner. I'm not good at like just blanket deck construction, but like if you give me like a list of 80 cards and you're like I said a lot of times on this podcast, I really love turning like D's into C's in like decks. like just finding like those small niche upgrades to give you like an extra like 2 to 3% more equity in like your deck win rate. Like that's a lot of fun. And I think that's what I'm like best at in like card games. But I think sitting down at the table, I'll sometimes like just misevaluate like a turn cycle and then like, or miss a tunic trigger. And then I realized like 2 turns later, like, oh man, if I had tunic here, this whole turn would be perfect and I'd have everything going for me. But I missed that trigger 2 turns ago. So now my tunic's only at 2. And well, I guess I just have a mopey turn. And then that cost me like the game. And like, that's just like a really frustrating thing to like have happen to you consistently.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense.
So you can keep being the Louis Scott Vargas of our podcast, and I'll just turn into more of like the Marshall Sutcliffe, the guy who's here for like witty comments and banter. And I guess that's LSV anyways but I'll just be like the entertaining co-host, you know?
I love Marshall and no shade, but LSV does do the humor in their podcast.
We just kind of reversed it where like you're the straight man, good player, and I'm the entertaining host kind of guy. Mm-hmm. Plus, I have a lot going on in my personal life as well with the baby and moving. And I started booking a tutor for my LSAT prep. So that's taking some amount of time away from me. Mm-hmm. And then obviously my job. And yeah, it's just hard to balance it all sometimes.
Yeah, you do have a lot of things going on. Just a baby and buying a house alone, I feel like, is enough to be like, wow, that's a lot of things going on. And there's a lot more on top of that. So
yeah, I never feel overwhelmed by like life stuff. I feel like I have an adequate amount of like challenge in my day-to-day life, which is nice, but it just means that like I don't have the time to like dedicate to like being like the best flesh and blood player I could be. And at this point, I don't even know how much equity there is in that for me overall. Because for what it's worth, for like you said, you and I practice about the same amount every week, the hour and a half in the morning, and then like I'll even play like I'll play like 2 games of Talishar across the day, like either in between like meetings during my lunch hour or like in the evening after dinner or something like that. And you're just like naturally just a very good card game player to a certain extent. Not that you don't put in the work, but you still just have a certain amount of like raw talent. And I think I have some degree of raw talent. I just don't know if it's like top tier player raw talent.
Sure. And I think I do also spend a lot of time consuming content. Like I listen to a lot of the Flesh and Blood podcasts, and I watched a lot of Isylander videos on YouTube while I was learning Isylander and kind of building her, and that helped a lot too. So I think like, I don't know, I feel like I have a good brain for it, but I also like spend a lot of time thinking about the game and learning about the game. And I'm fortunate to be in a spot in my life where I can devote both an hour and a half every morning to play testing and listen to an hour or 2 of content every day and not have it, I guess, harm the rest of my life, if that makes sense. So, mm-hmm. And then I also do play a reasonable amount of games outside of our morning tests. I've been playing against Ben and Travis a reasonable amount and some other people too. So it's, yeah, I don't know. It's hard.
On a positive note, I convinced our team to buy probably the world's greatest t-shirt.
This is the cringiest shirt. I can't believe we did this.
I'm gonna put a picture of it in the YouTube video at this timestamp.
Okay.
Right around this mark when we're playing it back, I'm gonna put a picture of the t-shirt and everybody can see how amazing it is. So if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, just imagine the world's most perfect t-shirt that has like 2 wolves in a yin-yang fashion that's blue and white, and that's the shirt I'm talking about. Just imagine it, and it's perfect. And that's what the shirt looks like.
It's everything Roger loves. It's got Azorius. It's got Yin Yang. I guess it's missing Austin. It's close.
Yeah, we need a picture of like my wife on one sleeve and then a picture of my baby on the other sleeve. Yeah. And then it'd be perfect. But it'd be a little weird for everybody on the team to be wearing my wife and baby on their sleeve. So I think I'm okay with them being off.
Fair. But yeah.
I do love me some yin yang.
All right.
So anything else you want to talk about Flesh and Blood wise before we sign off now? We kind of got off on a tangent
here. We frequently do. I think our listeners are probably a little bit used to that by now. I guess I am really looking forward to Nationals, and if you see us there, feel free to come up and say hi. It's always nice to have people come up to you and say hey. And
yeah. If you're looking for either one of us, Michael will be around the top tables. I'll be at some of the bottom tables, or if I'm at the top tables, I'll be standing directly behind Michael Hamilton watching his game. So that's how you can find us.
You got to give yourself more credit than that. Come on.
I'll give myself more credit when I earn the credit, Michael. There's no free handouts around here.
All right.
You earn what you keep in the wolf pack.
Okay. Did you have any closing thoughts either? Or all?
Flesh and Blood's still a lot of fun. I still enjoy the game a lot. And hopefully I'm selling myself short and I'll do reasonably well at Nationals. But we'll see what happens.
I guess one more thing I do want to add is I think it's easy for me to say this, so I'm probably not the best one to be saying this, but it's not great to tie your happiness to your results. And like, I remember before Nationals, you seemed pretty bummed that the whole team was going to be there hanging out, having a good time playing together. And you were kind of sad that you were going to miss the opportunity. And that's why you were even planning to go to just the calling, just to like see everyone and hang out too, along with playing the game. And like, I guess that's a big part of the tournaments are hanging out with people that you enjoy being around and doing a thing that you love with people that also enjoy it. And I'm really appreciative that I get to do that. And I hope that this doesn't come off badly saying that, but
no, not at all.
Okay.
And I fully recognize that too. Like, obviously tying your mental health to results is a really bad thing. And I don't think overall my mental health is like I'm not like crying myself to sleep at night saying like, why can't I just be like Michael? Why?
God.
You know, but at the end of the day, I'm still human. Right. And it's still just a way to like, you just can't help how you feel, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I am still looking forward to wearing our sweet shirts if they arrive in time. And if not, still hanging out with everybody and having a grand old time. Like I said in Lille, I had a great time hanging out with the wolf pack. That 5 liters of beer that we almost got through. Great. Good time. One of my favorite memories
story.
now. Yeah. And that dinner that I had the world's best duck in but everybody else hated their meal, but I bought us a nice bottle of champagne anyways that also nobody liked, but I thoroughly enjoyed.
Wait, nobody liked the champagne?
I don't think so. Nobody else was digging it, but I liked the bottle of champagne.
Okay.
It was from France. How do you not get a real bottle of champagne from France? You know?
I didn't drink any alcohol in France.
That made you drink a little bit of champagne, right?
Oh, maybe I did. I think you're right. Yeah, I did. I lied. I'm sorry. I forgot.
Blocked that out of your memory.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much. And next time you're playing Flesh and Blood, always remember, mind your manners. Thanks for listening, everybody.